Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. Hey, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I'm super duper excited to be here with you today. And you guys, I can't believe I've never done an episode with this title. If I have, I'm totally losing my mind. A lot of times I have to Google my own show. Oh my God, I'm totally losing my mind. But I do. I have to Google my own show to figure out if I ever did an episode. Look, I'm like 322 episodes in. I do not remember what happened 6 years ago. So, okay, this episode is called Meaning Making Machines. And I made myself a bunch of notes because there's so many things I don't want to forget that I wanted to say. So those of you who are watching, if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. But here's the thing. So you've probably have heard me say on this podcast before that humans are meaning making machines. And what I mean by that is we like to assign meaning to all of the events and the experiences and the environments and the people that have happened to us. You know what I mean? Like, and it starts way back when we're little kids because we're trying to figure out like what the fuck is going on a lot of the time. So we look around at the events that have happened. We look around at the experiences that we're having. We're looking around at the environments we grew up in, the people we grew up around, everybody from your origin family to the people at school, your church, or, you know, where you played softball, like whatever. The people, the cast of characters that you come in contact with as a child, right? It leaves a mark. It leaves an impression. And so when these things are happening, the way that our brains work, right? Yes, we are meaning making machines. We love meaning. But this is the job of the brain. This is what the brain does. The brain loves to assign meaning to things. And we especially love to try to figure it out and assign meaning to it. I think because to me, when I can assign meaning to something, then it makes me and my nervous system feel a little bit more safe. I don't always like the meaning that I've discovered or think it is, especially when the meaning I've come to is that person's just an asshole and they're wicked mean and they're not nice, right? Like it's not always soothing, but at least it's like in my brain, there's a thing that's like, make it make sense, right? Like make it make sense. So our brains really love to assign meaning to things, especially when meaning isn't wicked clear, when something doesn't make sense. So our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world around us. And sometimes this can lead us into either assigning positive meaning or quote unquote negative meaning. So this can lead us to see something or this person or ourselves or whatever. It can leave a positive imprint or a negative interpretation depending on who you are as a person, depending on how your brain tends to work. It's not the same for everybody. So where this can get a little wonky and where it gets wonky most of the time is that meaning is getting assigned subconsciously. We're not even aware that we've assigned meaning to a person or a tone of voice or a look or an event or a situation. The brain, I've talked about this before on previous episodes, but the brain tends to have a negativity bias, which means we often assign things a negative meaning out of habit or based on past or previous experiences. That's just the nature of us being human. We tend to lean a little bit more towards the negative. Not all people, but most people, most brains. But the fact that, you know, we could decide one of the other is wicked good news because ultimately it means that we can choose the meaning that we give to things, to situations, to events, to experiences. And sometimes the meaning that we assign to things can change over time, over the years, with new insight, reading a book, getting a new teacher, getting a new POV, a little point of view, a little shift in perception. It's really powerful. So it's not like we're stuck with the meaning that we assign things. We can update the file. We can update the system. I always say when we get smarter, better, right? When we get smarter, when we get better, when we get a little more experience or knowledge or insight or information or whatever, we can upgrade or shift or change. And I can't talk about meaning and making meaning without also talking about and I should say that there's like a part one and a part two to this episode. So please stick around because I want you to hear about right now, we're talking about making meaning for ourselves. But in part two, we're going to look at how we don't make meaning for other people. And I'll explain that when we get there. But I can't talk about being meaning making machines without talking about one of my people on my spiritual team, one of my heroes. And he is Viktor Frankl. If you've been around for a while, you have probably heard of Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist. He was a neurologist. He was a philosopher. He was a writer and author. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he wrote the book called Man's Search for Meaning. He's also the founder of a type of therapy called logotherapy. And it's a school of therapy that actually centers around meaning creation. And Viktor Frankl kind of talks about this. And I want to pause for a second and just ask you to think about this for a second. You can even hit pause on the podcast, just come back. But think about how you assign meaning to every little thing in your life. Because we do it to big things, little things, things that we would think are inconsequential. Okay, so based on, I'll just give you a perfect example. If you grew up in a household where you had to walk on eggshells, whatever the experience was, maybe you had a mother or a father or a guardian or somebody who was an alcoholic or had drug substance use disorder, whatever. But you never knew who you were getting. Things were completely unpredictable. You don't know, maybe there was sexual abuse in your home, mental, physical abuse, whatever it was. So kids that grew up in those kinds of environments, we become kind of like hyper vigilant for other people's energy, for the vibe in the room. Like I call it like taking the weather, like you're always keeping an eye on the weather. And the way that we do that is by often clocking what other people are doing, saying, feeling, looking, whatever. So I used to say I would always be looking at my stepfather's forehead because I could tell by the landscape of his forehead what kind of trouble was about to go down, right? Sometimes it's a mood. Sometimes it's the way they're talking, their tone of voice. So if you grow up in that kind of environment, right? And it, like I said, it could be the way somebody sighs. It could be the way somebody puts their purse down, like whatever it is. Like you were absorbing all of this as a child. Okay, now you're an adult and you're in a relationship. Okay, and your partner, your sweetie, whoever, right? The person you live with, all of a sudden they like do a big sigh, or they shut the cabinet door a certain way, or you hear them put their keys in like the key bowl by the front door. And all of a sudden you're on alert because you're like, something's off. This person isn't happy. And for those of us who fawned, right, as a trauma response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, those of us who fawned, it's like, oh my God, I got to fix this. I got to make it right. Because if you're not okay, I'm not okay. And like, oh my God, and like, are you okay? Like, you know, somebody like looks at you a particular way for a second. It could be a split second and you're like, oh my God, I'm in trouble, right? I did a whole podcast on that called You're Not in Trouble. For those of us who had really sensitive, we all have sensitive nervous systems, I think. But some of us are like wicked sensitive, highly sensitive people. So double amen hands if you know what I'm talking about, right? So we hear those things, we feel those things, we sense a shift in the weather in the room, and all of a sudden we start to assign meaning to it, right? So we assign meaning to every little thing from, like, again, the way that somebody's talking, walking, what somebody said to us, the fact that they didn't respond to a text right away, like really wicked big things and very small things. Our nervous systems are always attuning into like what's going on. And we hate uncertainty. Most people hate uncertainty. We like to know what to expect because we get a little more safety. Now, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. tons of people are like, I don't like things to be familiar all the time. I like adventure and newness and adrenaline rushes and whatever. They want things to be mixed up. They don't always want to know what's around the next corner. But most people, the nervous system and the brain really likes what's familiar. Okay, I wanted to just say that. So I'm sure you can relate on some level to what I'm saying. And if you can, I apologize. Maybe you don't want to keep listening. Okay, but those of you that are still with me, Viktor Frankl, right? So he came up with this school of therapy called logotherapy, which is all centered around meaning making. And I'm going to share with you, like, so part of his core philosophy was that a person's deepest desire, right? He wrote this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. A man's deepest desire is to find meaning in his life. And if he can find that meaning, this is wicked important. Listen to this. He says, if he can find that meaning, he can survive anything. And this is coming from a guy who survived 3 years in concentration camps, right? He's a Holocaust survivor. And he says this. He said that he found meaning in his experiences in the concentration camp by deciding that he was going to use his suffering as an opportunity to make himself a better person. So instead of becoming, feeling like totally doomed, becoming apathetic, he chose to embrace his suffering. Now, Viktor Frankl talks about that there are 3 ways to find meaning in life. He says you can find it through work, you can find it through love, and you can even find it through suffering. And I thought that this was so fantastic. And to give you like examples of each of those, his desire to live a meaningful life, even though he was in Auschwitz and he was in a concentration camp and there was no guarantee that he was going to live, he says that he kept himself alive during those 3 years in the camps by focusing on the potential meanings that he could create for himself. So let's go back to finding meaning through work. So before he was put into the camp, he was working on a manuscript on logotherapy. And the Germans like took it away from him. The Nazis took it away from him when they put him in the camps. And so he held on to meaning by thinking about the work he was going to create, the manuscript that he was going to rewrite and recreate once he got out of the camps. That was one thing that he focused on. He also focused on love by he put his faith in the hope of love by remembering the image of his wife. That he said the image of his wife in his mind helped him through most of his difficult times. And he also found meaning in suffering. And he said, I'm determined to find meaning in this suffering. And here are some quotes that I absolutely love that have helped me over the years when I was going through my own suffering, right? And when I bump up against my own self-made suffering, right? Suffering of my own making because of the meaning I'm assigning to things or because of what's going on. And times when unexpectedly awful things happen in the world, right? Suffering is part of this human experience. There's no getting away from it. And I always say, like, we're gonna suffer. For me, I'm not saying for you, for me, I get to decide how long that suffering is going to last. Now, sometimes we have physical ailments, so I want to make sure, right? Like I can't cover all the nuances of this. We don't have time. But sure, of course, there are times when we're going to be physically suffering with something and we're like, I don't know when this flu is going to end. But what I can do is do all the things that I can possibly do to try and help myself, like stay hydrated, get rest, eat when I can eat, like, no, all the shit that you can do to like try and like end your suffering or shorten your suffering or whatever. But listen to these quotes. He says, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I love this. Everything can be taken from you, he says, except this last human freedom, which is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstances, which is to say, no matter what is happening, you get to decide how you're going to respond. And he's famous for saying, like, in between the stimulus, the event, the experience, right? The thing that's happening. In between that event and your response. There is a pause. There is a moment when you get to choose, who am I going to be? How am I going to be? What am I going to say? Right? In A Course in Miracles, we say that there's but two emotions, love and fear, which is another way of saying that there's two teachers, right? There's the ego, and then there's like spirit, Holy Spirit, love. The ego is the voice of fear. The internal teacher, Holy Spirit, some people might call that Jesus, some people might call that love. We get to decide in that moment, right? Who and how we're going to be. And we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. He also says, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And to me, this is also a challenge to be able to do what A Course in Miracles calls a miracle, which is a shift in perception, a shift in our mind from fear to love. That's where this concept comes from, not Viktor Frankl, but in A Course in Miracles, it says a shift in perception from fear to love. Like that is the miracle. You know, if we cannot change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. We're challenged to change the way that we're thinking about what is happening. And we see it a lot in what's going on in the world right now. There's a lot in the world that I cannot control, but I can choose how I'm going to respond to what's happening in the world. I can choose to how I'm going to contribute to the world. Okay, he also says this. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such as the meaning of a sacrifice. Wow, I love this so much. Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. Because sometimes you have to do wicked, hard things. And you'll say, yeah, this is hard. Yeah, this sucks. Yeah, this is awful. But on the other side of this, that person is going to know that I love them, that I showed up, that I kept my word, that I did this thing. If we can find meaning, it changes everything. And this is the last of this, I'll say. I mean, I could talk about Viktor Frankl on and on and on and on. His book, again, is Man's Search for Meaning. If you've never read it, I highly encourage you to check it out. But here's a final quote from him. He says, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. So having that why, that understanding is one of the most powerful things that there is. So we are going to continually search for meaning. And my whole thing is become really aware. Like in the work that I do with people, it's always like, know why you do what you do, think what you think, say what you say, believe what you believe, tell the stories that you're telling. Why? Understand causal. We love to focus on effect. Oh, they're doing this and this is happening and right? But it's like if we can get to causal, to the why, we can usually figure out the how and deal with the how and live through the how. Okay. So coming back to this, we can choose to give things either a positive or more empowering spin, a more empowering and helpful meaning to things, or we can choose to look at things in a more negative light. We can choose to look at something as, you know what, that was really hard, but that was a great opportunity. I gained wisdom, I gained insight, I gained something rather than focusing on the loss or what it cost me. Okay? And I'm going to just stay with me because this is good. Not like you know what I'm saying. Stay with me. We can look for ways that something either totally blows and totally sucks, or we can kind of look for, okay, this is something that eventually is going to, it might be feeling like it's pulling me down right now, but eventually this sucker is going to build me up. Okay. I grew stronger because of this. I grew more resilient because of this. I surprised myself with my own strength and my own tenacity, right? So even things that sometimes in the moment, the meaning might be like, this doesn't feel very soothing. It might surprise us when we dig deep what we discover about ourselves along the way. And here's the thing. I think it was Shakespeare, but there's a saying that says something like to paraphrase, it's like things are both positive and negative, but it's our thinking that makes it so. Because I believe that like situations hold both negative and positive aspects within them. They're not all always positive or all always negative, But what we choose to focus on will be, right? Whether we choose to focus on the positivity or we choose to focus on the negativity of it, that is what's going to create the meaning that we make and the stories that we continue to tell. And the meaning that we assign to things, the beliefs that we create, the stories we tell, those things become our identity in the long run. So it's wicked important to be aware of the meaning that you are assigning to the things and the people and the events that are happening in your life, right? And again, we can view those things through different lenses, through the ego and the fear lens, or through the spirit or the love lens. And we get to choose what lens we are using. You know, I used to tell my Course in Miracles people who I used to do a Course in Miracles study group a long time ago. And I used to say to them, you got to put your love glasses on, man. You got to put your love glasses on because sometimes we're just looking around like, make this make sense. Like this makes no sense. And sometimes it's the lens that we're using to view a person, place, or thing that's making it cloudy, that's making it hard for us to see that there's another possible meaning to this. Now, here's something that's really important. I keep using the word choose. You can choose which lens you're going to use. You can choose the meaning you're going to assign to something. But there's a caveat here. Until we are aware that we have a choice, that there actually is even a choice, we are just going to run with the POV, the point of view, the perspective that we're used to, that we were taught, that we grew up with, or that we are familiar with. I talk about this a lot, about why reading A Return to Love, why discovering Marianne Williamson as a teacher, and now, of course, later as a friend and a spiritual godmother and a mentor, right? Why discovering A Course in Miracles was so incredible for me in my brain, for me in my mind, right? Is because up until that point, I did not realize that my suffering was a choice. I didn't realize. Now, I want to be wicked clear. I'm not talking about children. I'm not talking about people who have no power, right? There are times when you are in awful fucking situations and conditions and places, and you end up there by no fault of your own. I'm not talking about that. There are true victims in the world, okay? I'm talking about how once you become aware, whether that's, again, through meeting somebody new, getting new information, finding a teacher or a mentor who imparts a new way of looking at the world, a new way of looking at yourself, of treating yourself with respect and kindness, of not being caught in the victim loop, et cetera, right? But until we're aware that we actually do have a choice, we don't think we have a choice. And when I picked up A Return to Love and I read that book a gazillion years ago, back in 1992, and Marianne basically was breaking down some of the principles of A Course in Miracles. And I realized, like, holy shit, I had a choice. I always say this, it both pissed me off and got me wicked excited. I didn't know. So a lot of people are walking around just playing, as we say these terms like caught in the victim loop, playing the victim card, stuck in their old story, because they don't know. They don't know yet. It has not occurred to them, or they just don't want to. Sometimes people just don't want to change. They want to stay stuck in it. That's their right. They can do whatever they want to do. That's not how I want to live my life, but it's not for me to judge them, right? But until we know, we're going to just keep playing the old game. We're going to keep running the old racket, right? Until we get new information, we update the system. And you'll see it happening around you if you pay really close attention. I always say negativity can run in a family like a wildfire. You know, I sometimes feel like I'll be around certain, family or whatever people that I know. And you see them, they're all competing for the award of fucking who has it the worst, who has the most aches and pains, who has the most ailments, who has the most right? You see it. I'm just saying, like, out in the world, just pay attention. Just pay attention. Groups of people that come up together, hang out together, whatever, you'll see there's a certain kind of mindset, a certain kind of way of looking at things and approaching things. That's how, like, racism happens too, right? And this shit gets taught and gets passed down. This is how hate continues to spread in the world. So we need people who start to like get like they always talk about being woke. I'm like, I don't have a problem with waking up to like how things are, right? Like I want to be woke. I want to be awakened. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So here's the thing. You got to pay attention. You got to pay attention. And once you recognize and realize that you have a choice, you have to start asserting that authority, that agency, that authorship, that power, right? To decide to go like, oh yeah, I don't have to look at it this way, even though this is the way that I've looked at it for a wicked long time, or this is what my family taught me, or this is what my caretakers showed me, or this is what I was taught through this religion or that coach or that person. We have autonomy, we have agency, we have authorship, we can decide, okay? And so this is when we're getting up. Well, now we're about to come up to part two. The last however long I've been talking, it's all been like you get to decide, you get to decide, you get to choose. Notice how I'm saying you and your mind, because you cannot, I always say this, for the love of all things holy, we want to take control over the meaning making machines of our own mind. Of our own mind. But welcome to part two. Here's what we can't do. We cannot decide for other people the meaning that they make of things. It's not our place and it's not our right. We cannot rob people of their experience or their meaning that they're assigning to something. So let me give you an example. This is what I always say. I'm like, I can flip a script. I always say, I can flip a script like a motherfucker. Like I can find the silver lining, the positive in anything. I can find the gift, I can find the lesson, I can find the blessing in all kinds of personally difficult things. Okay. Maybe I was born that way. I don't know. I see pictures of myself when I was a little kid and I was like smiling all the time. However, there was there was a certain period in my life when I kind of had like a wicked negative perspective. I kind of had a little bit of an attitude problem. You know what I mean? And so I wasn't always, I think I was a really happy little kid. And then some stuff went down. Some people got a hold of me. Some things happened. And then I went through like a little dark night of the soul. You know what I mean? I came out the other side. Thank you, Jesus, right? Like, thank you, spiritual team. Thank you, mom. Thank you, God. Thank you, all the divine helpers, the teachers, the mentors, the books, the cassettes, Thank you. Anybody, thank you. Or anybody who's given me some insight into my own insanity, I super duper appreciate it. Okay. So I had to learn how to train my mind. It was after learning how to train my mind, which A Course in Miracles was a huge role in, which yoga was a huge thing in. All the different tools that I put in my spiritual toolkit. Amen. Thank you very much. Double amen hands. Okay. So I now have a tendency to lean towards the positive. Okay. I don't turn on my blinders to the awful shit that's going on in the world. But for myself, like me personally, I try to find what I can use. You know what I mean? Like I try to find what I can use in a situation. I try to find what is helpful for me, even when I don't like it. I try to find what is helpful. And I said this before. I just actually just said that. I've said it on a other podcasts, but I most recently said it on my my friend's podcast, on the It Has to Be Me podcast with Tess Masters. I said I wouldn't be the person that I am today if my mother had lived. I wouldn't be the person I am today if my mother had lived. Now that right there is me finding, right, the positive in that. Because this is absolutely true. I don't think I would be the person that I am today if my mother would have lived. But I like to put a positive spin on things. But here's the thing. Who knows? Who knows? I might have turned out way better. I might have turned out way better if I had had my mother for more than 12 years of my life. I like to think that, I say, oh, I wouldn't be who I am today. Of course not, because surviving that and all of that is a big deal, right? Like I learned a lot about myself and the world and violence and people. But I don't know. Maybe I would have turned out way better if she had lived, right? But I'll never know that. I'll never know that. I don't have the opportunity to know that. I don't have a choice in that. So I got to work with what I've got. But that's me with me. With other people, We have to be wicked careful that we don't try to assign meaning to what's going on for them. And I see people do it all the time. I see it in spiritual communities. I see it in quote unquote positive vibes only. I see it in spiritually like positive talks, like toxic positivity. I think I did a whole podcast on that. It's so important, you guys, that we do not spiritually try to bypass away other people's experience or pain, what they're going through. Let me give an example. So in the spiritual community, and we could argue all day on what spiritual really means. I know there are tons of people out there who think spiritual just means like tarot cards and friggin' the Enneagram and human design and incense and psychic readings, right? That's not how I like to define spirituality. I'm not saying that's not a can be a part of it. That's not how, so we don't have time for that. But let's just say in the spiritual community in general, I often hear people say things like this. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. I understand why we say that. I understand what people mean when they say this. However, saying that to a person who recently lost somebody that they love, no matter what that loss is, whether it's a child, whether it's your grandpa who's 97, whether it's somebody who had took their own life, whether it's a tragic car accident, whether it's whatever. When you say to somebody who's really suffering, everything happens for a reason, it is so tone deaf. It's like read the room. Because here's the reality. Everything happens for a reason. What that means is you are now putting the impetus on the other person that they're somehow supposed to come up with some positive reason why their child is no longer here, or their loved one is dead, or their dog who they've had for 14 years, who was their best friend or companion, is no longer there, doing all the most beautiful doggy things, right? It's like we say these things, and it's like because Americans especially have this very like individualistic, like pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. And certain parts of the country, even more so, there's an expectation that you're just going to suck it up, right? Stuff it down and get on with shit, right? Everything happens for a reason, kid. Yeah, but here's the thing. Sometimes the reason is because somebody had uncontrollable rage. It's not like, oh, everything happens for a reason because somehow this is going to benefit you. Oh, yeah, you're going to say that to a rape victim. You're going to say that to a murder victim. You're going to say that to the people in Palestine, people who are in wars, the people who are starving, the people who are unhoused and homeless. Everything happens for a reason. Oh, okay, let me just go out there with my like spirituality sprinkles and just like pour pink paint over everything and make this nice. No, sometimes the reason that something is happening again is because somebody had uncontrollable rage, or somebody lost their friggin' patience and had road rage, or somebody is out of their mind, or somebody had no friggin' tools. Or as my stepfather used to say when we were kids, they're sick in the fucking head. Sometimes people do really fucked up, sick, awful things. And a lot of times when something awful happens to somebody, this is not the time to be putting your little spiritual jimmies on things, little spiritual sprinkles on everything. We don't get to decide for other people what the meaning is for them. And, people need time to process, to feel their feelings, to ride the waves of grief. And that might take years, might take forever. So we don't just get to go around silver linings playbooking everybody. Because the reality is we try to force that positivity sometimes in other people because we're uncomfortable with other people's suffering. We're uncomfortable with other people's grief and other people's emotions and other people's feelings. That's why we say things like, you're not over that yet. You think you dealt with that already. We don't get to assign the meaning for other people or the timeline. We don't establish that for other people. Okay. We want to talk about this for a while. We don't get to decide for other people whether or not their loss or their tragedy or their trauma gets a positive spin. That's not our job. We don't get to play DJ on that record. You know what I'm saying? Here's another one. And I've said this before too. I've said it before too. It is like a mindset self-help mantra, right? It happened for you and not to you. We love to say that one, don't we? It happened for you and not to you. If you had tried to tell me that, if you had tried to tell me so much, not even just my mother's murder, but so many of the things that I went through in my younger years, if you had tried to tell me that line back then, I would have wanted to karate chop you right in the throat. I would have been like, nope, hiya, kung, no, not having it. Everybody was kung fu fighting. That's what would have happened. I would not have been having it at all. Because at first, when things happen to you, and especially when you're a child, everything does feel like it's happening to you. Nothing feels like it's happening for you. I don't have the wisdom yet. I didn't have the insight yet. I didn't have the perspective. I didn't have, right, my 50 plus more years of wisdom or whatever. When you're little kids, everything is happening to you because you don't have a say and you don't have a choice. When things are being imposed on you because people outrank you, outweigh you, have more power than you. Sure, maybe with time and experience and a little wisdom, right? People will have a different perspective, but it's not for us to say to other people. And we say it all the time. And the truth is that there are things in life that are going to happen that just make no sense. We try to find the meaning. We're desperate for meaning. We want to understand, why did this happen? And this is how sometimes we see people in crises of faith, right? Deeply religious people. I've seen them crumble when something really big happens to them. And they'll say things like, why did God let this happen to me? Right? Because they think that God did this thing to them, to their family, to their community, to their town, to their marriage, to their life, whatever, right? And there are things in life that just make no sense. Like, honestly, I can make no sense of this whole big, beautiful bill thing. Again, some people might get pissed at me, but like, it just boggles my mind. It boggles my mind that so many people, like when I see all the White House people praying over this bill, the Christians, all the Christians praying over this bill, it makes me want to like bang my face off my desk. Like, how are so many people supporting legislature that's designed to hurt so many people? And then they're praying over it and they're clapping and they're celebrating it. I don't get it. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Because I don't think my little Christian friends that Jesus would have your back on this one. I don't think so. Not for me to say. I'm not Jesus. Just my point of view. So, and we're back. And we're back. Let's get back to my point. We love to make sense of things. We are meaning-making machines. Our brain are meaning-making machines. But some things just make no sense. And I know I tried to do it with my mother's murder. Part of my suffering for a wicked long time was me trying to make sense of it. Like, I spent so much time trying to make sense of what it finally dawned on me was a senseless act. Because even though I could come up with all kinds of possible scenarios and reasons and explanations for maybe why this guy did what he did, none of them were sufficient. None of them made any sense. It never made any sense. And this is sometimes where our humanity and our divinity get to meet. This is when we say things like, right, like God works in mysterious ways. There are just things that are going to go down on this planet, in this experience, in this illusion, what some people call the Maya, the illusion, the dream, the human, right, the human experience, that are just never going to make any sense. We want to make sense. We're desperate to assign meaning. But part of this is accepting the mystery that we don't have all the answers. We don't always know why things happen. And sometimes we will go to our graves not knowing why a thing happens. And then that work becomes, how do I make peace with it? How do I still find joy in my life, even though X, Y, and Z went down? How do I still find meaning and hope? How do I still find resourcefulness? How do I still maybe find joy or happiness despite what's happened? Sometimes we can bounce back from really awful things. I see people I see people that inspire me all the time when I think, Jesus Christ, like, how did they survive that? And then how did they come out on the other side of it? And sometimes I'm kind of asking rhetorically because sometimes I know they got through it because of their faith or because of the tools in their spiritual toolkit or because they worked with a really fantastic therapist or a hypnotist or a coach or a mentor or they had an incredible family support or friends that surrounded them that held them up when they couldn't walk for themselves, when they couldn't feed themselves or clean themselves or take care of themselves. You're surrounded by an incredible community who actually cares about you and loves you and supports you. You know, we always want to make meaning and we always want to understand. But the reality of it is that sometimes we don't get the reason. And coming back to my first point, we're going to be like, make it make sense. And we can do that for ourselves. That's part one. We do get to choose. We do get to choose what kind of a spin, what kind of a point of view, what kind of perspective. Are we going to go for love or fear? Are we going to look for the miracle? Are we going to look for how this empowered me and I grew from it? And maybe even the outcome wasn't what I wanted, but even that outcome I could find. I always say, like work with what happens. We got to work with what happens. But it's not our place to tell other people. Everything happens for a reason. Didn't happen to you, it happened for you. Let them decide that when the time is right. And maybe it will never be right for them. We don't get to decide other people's journeys. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, I could literally talk for hours about making meaning as a storyteller. One of the things that I do as somebody who, am writing a memoir is trying to make meaning, trying to understand. Not just, as my friend Andre Dubus III says, what happened, but what the hell happened? That's the heartbeat of it as a writer. And I'm actually going to be doing a workshop, an online workshop for writers. That's coming up in August. So stay tuned for that if you're a writer and somebody who might want to write online with me. I've been invited to lead calling it Fearless Flow Writing. And I've been leading writing workshops for a gazillion years, but we'll talk more about that later. But in the work that I do with people, a lot of the times when people are coming to me, they're trying to make sense of like, how did I end up here? Why do I feel this way? Why do I think this way? Why can't I get out of my own way? They're trying to understand. They're looking for meaning in their life. They want to have purpose. They want to understand. They want to, as I say, get under the under. They want to know, why do I do what I do, think what I think? How can I shift from feeling this way that I don't want to feel anymore to feeling differently? And whether that's stopping a habit or a pattern or being able to see themselves with more love and compassion or kindness. That's why I call it your story to your glory. It's this transformation. It's a process that we go through, and it's different for everybody. That's why I don't say I solved this one problem, because everybody's journey is unique. Everybody's journey. Yes, there are universal things that we can all point to, but they happen on a very personal level. And that's why I love working one-to-one person, womano. I always say mano y mano or womano y womano, or person to person, human to human, hat to hat, right? Because there's so much right now in the world that we are trying to make sense of. And I got to tell you, a lot of the math is not mathing. A lot of the math is not adding up. But so who can I be and how can I be in the world, that maybe feels like it's adding, it's contributing in a positive way. So I hope your meaning-making machine tends to lean towards the positive for your own benefit. Because when we get out of that, being hijacked by fear, we get out of the fight and the flight and the trauma response, we let the amygdala like have a break, right? We become a little more regulated, feel a little more safe enough to do what we came here to do. That's when we can be helpful to other people and to ourselves and to the animals. So I think I'm going to stop there because this already feels like it's wicked long. So I hope this was helpful in some way. If you enjoyed it, right? Share it with somebody. If you found it helpful, share it with somebody who you think you can who will recognize themselves in it, like, oh, me too. I kind of know how to find the positive in that. Or maybe there's somebody who's struggling with something, and letting them know, right, that you hear them, that you see them, that maybe this will be helpful in some way to them. If you found it beneficial, maybe they will too. And I appreciate that. I appreciate your support. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Um, as you always know, you can find me, how to work with me, what I have going on in my group mentoring program, The Nest, working with me one-to-one in spiritual mentoring, The Quest, hot to hot days. There's all kinds of ways to get in touch and stay in touch. So you can just join my newsletter also, KarenKenney.com/sign up. And I'll put you right on my email list so you can get these suckers, these podcasts right into your email inbox every Thursday morning, bright and early. Okay. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. Wherever you go, may you leave yourself and the animals and the other people and the planet and the environment better than how you first found it. Wherever you go, may you and your love and your energy and your presence and the meaning that you make be a blessing. Bye.